Håkan Andersson, welcome back to the Pacey Performance Podcast. It's always a pleasure to speak to you.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks a lot for the invitation.
No, my pleasure. And just before we do get going, I've had Les Spellman on. I've had a couple of people on who are coming to the Sports with Speed conference in March, and we were just saying before our press record that it'll be great to have everyone in the room and actually meet people who we've never met before, and you included. We've spoken quite a few times virtually, but it'll be great to have you at the conference. I'm really looking forward to getting you over.
Yeah, me too. It's great. You know, this kind of conference is a great way to meet new people and also meet old friends, you know. So I'm really looking forward to it.
I often see on Twitter that, I don't know who it is or if it's you that mentions it, at a conference, was it Sundsvall?
I do live in Sundsvall, you know. It's
okay.
Yeah.
Was there a conference there a while ago that people keep referring to?
We used to have, you know, like a sprint hurdle carnival here every year, and in conjunction with that, we always organized a clinic too, you know, so for coaches, and we had some fantastic speakers, during the year. So that's probably what they're referring to. Great athletes, great speakers, and great coaches. Yeah.
I want people in 10 years to be still talking about this conference in March as they do with the Sundsvall one. So yeah, that'd be great to have you. But I wanted to get you on the podcast to discuss a few other things, some things that you may touch on in your talk in Leeds in March, but other things that you won't. But just before we do, I'm not going to ask you to do a full rundown of your biography because we've done that before and people can listen back elsewhere. But would you mind just giving us a bit of an overview of what you do, Håkan?
Sure. You know, it's been a few years since we did the last one. So I'm turning 65 this fall. I've been a sprint coach on national or international level since 1985. So I'm approaching 40 years as a coach, you know. So, and I've been very fortunate to coach some, you know, unbelievable talented athletes, both in track and field but also in other sports. I've been, like most track coaches, been, you know, consulting in, you know, a lot of team sports, and I'm currently employed as an senior advisor at something called the High Performance Center in Växjö, a city that's hard to pronounce.
I'm glad you said that. I didn't ask me to say it.
Yeah, so I consult coaches. I'm responsible for the testing facility and so on. You know, so and we consult more than 30 professional teams, you know, in ice hockey, handball, football, and so on, and plus individual athletes as well, you know. So I'm quite busy. Apart from that, I'm coaching a group nowadays on junior sprinters up in my hometown of Sundsvall. That is about 4 hours north of Stockholm.
Excellent. So the teams that are consulting at the testing center, are they coming purely for testing, or are they training as well?
It's a huge variation, you know. Some only for testing, you know. Some come, you know, for advice. Some, you know, we conduct daily training for as well, you know. So it's a wide range, you know. It's from the highest professional level to, you know, Division 3, Division 4 teams, you know, they're a bit more serious about their physical training. So.
Amazing. So just before we do get into the meat of the conversation, what state is Swedish track and field in right now?
Well, it's pretty healthy at the moment. You know, we had a prime in the early 2000s when, you know, we had the Carolina Klüft, the Stefan Holms, Kajsa Bergqvist and so on, you know. And it was a little down for a while, but now it's really, really good again. You know, we had gold and silver in the discus in the last Olympics. You know, we have Monde Duplantis, and we have a lot of very promising athletes that can probably medal in future championships.
Sounds good. Right, let's dive in. Plyometrics, something that you're probably very well known for, given the content that you put on social media and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to plyometrics, let's go for track athletes first, and we can kind of transition that over into more generalized team sport athletes. But for track athletes, what's your philosophy when it comes to jump training and plyometrics?
Well, I think plyometric is a good tool. but it's not everything. If plyometric was the only thing for developing sprinters, the jumpers would be the best sprinters, but they are not. So it's a tool among other things, but it's I think can really beneficial on many ways. So, even in team sports, I think it's a fantastic tool for general coordination. It fits very well into warm up. It's really strengthens plantar flexors and even the intrinsic muscles of the feet. So it serves a preparation for injuries, but also for development of running speed.
So do you separate those two? Do you separate the injury reduction side and the performance side when you're thinking about programming plyometric jump training?
Yeah, I think you can categorize them in two major. So you have the low amplitude plyometrics, that almost everyone can do, and then you have the more intensive kind of plyometrics that can really drive performance, But it's not for everyone, You have to be careful, especially with team sport athletes. I found, that there is a very potent way of training, So I rather choose soft surfaces. I do more. I prefer more, low amplitude, less intensity training, and do nothing extreme, and try to be careful with, heavy or inexperienced players in particular.
So let's dive into the low amplitude stuff, because the high intensity stuff will get the likes and the attention on social media, which obviously that looks great. But when it comes to the low amplitude stuff, what does that look like for you? What kind of things? Just paint a picture for us.
Well, it's it can be cognitive jump exercises done on softer surfaces. It can be rope skipping. It can also be sprint drills that is of plyometric nature. Everything that you don't fall from a high height, that the impact forces are less.
Do you have any sort of continuum where you would for low amplitude plyometrics as you progress people through that? I know that's kind of a staple, can be a staple throughout. It doesn't have to be used as a progression to get to something more higher intensity, but do you have something like a progression that you could talk us through?
Well, I think everyone, after a competitive season, before you start, I think everyone, almost anyone you talk to in athletics in Sweden, they start their build up with coordinated jumping exercises, do it in the woods, do it outside in the nature, just jump, but nothing extensive to prepare for what is coming. But it fits very, very well into young kids when they start, before puberty, it's very easy to learn coordination, so it fits very well into that age, and so you learn how to jump early. Then that can be really, really beneficial on a later stage. If you have never done any jumping before, and you come to maybe 22, 23, you're going to struggle. It's a skill. Jumping is a skill just as running is, sprinting is. But the problem nowadays, I found, children, if you go to a playground, it's hard to see kids standing still. They jump around, and a lot of the games they play when they're young is like hopscotch, the rope skipping and so on. But the problem these days, I find that we talk about that a lot. That the kids, they play a lot less these days. They spend more time in front of computers and and less time on the playground. So when it comes to sports, they don't have much jumping experience. So if a kid comes when they're starting track and field when they're 14, 15, you have to be very, very careful, much more careful these days than maybe 20 years ago, because then it was easier then, because a lot of kids have been playing a lot and they don't play so much physical anymore.
And I think that probably even is amplified when you see, like I mentioned, on social media, You see the sexy stuff, you see the high-end stuff,
Yeah.
and maybe coaches could potentially fall into a trap of progressing too quickly in the scenarios that you mentioned with young athletes who haven't been exposed to that through play and through different activities and want to move along that continuum a little bit too quick.
Yeah, and I agree 100%. And sometimes, jumping is a way of overloading. I mean, you do physical training apart from your event because you want to overload in some sense, And we know from research that the peak forces in the vertical sense among the fastest people in the world is maybe 4 to 5 times body weight, but that's a peak force, right? But to jump, to create a jump that on that level is very easy, And you can understand. We must understand that if you're doing a very intensive bounding, on one, some unilateral exercises, the reactant forces are, maybe 12, 15 times the body weight on one leg. So sometimes if you talk about specificity, that kind of specificity is kind of remote, because the forces are so much greater, when it comes to jumping than in sprinting alone. So you have to draw a line, I think, how much high intensity jumping do you really benefit as a sprinter? Like I said before, if the jumpers were the best, was the best, sprinters, maybe they would, but they're not, So sometimes I think we tend to overdo things too, like it got to be higher, it got to be faster. I think we can get away with a lot less intensive jumping and still benefit a transfer to sprinting if that's our goal.
So have you been guilty of that in the past and have since
Yeah, for sure. I think, for sure, we like to measure things, we salute when people, break personal best in the standing 5 jumps or, the rebound jumps and so on, but just in heavy lifting, with experience, you start to see that the transfer is not that great. The biggest transfer is at the beginning, when you start to introduce a new tool for a while, but then usually you get a very diminishing return in terms of development of sprinting, capacity.
So do you think, it comes back to the point I've probably made a couple of times, but do you think that often coaches, and this is very general, but often coaches may think they need to keep pushing this person, this athlete, on and on and on and on to up this continuum, when actually a lot of gains can be made a lot lower down and with less risk?
I agree 100%. There's always the risk and reward too, and I think we sometimes tend to go overboard, yes, because of a person run 10-2 in 100 meter and can squat 150 kilos. He's going to run 10-1 or 10-0 just because he can improve his squat to 200. Not necessary. Usually not. My experience.
Yeah. So let's have a little chat around specificity as a concept when it comes to plyometrics, and you've mentioned it there. So, like you say, do we get into the realm of trying to make things too specific when it comes to the types of jumps that we're coaches like you are programming for sprinters?
Well, you have to ask yourself, specific to what. There's a lot of boxes to be ticked off when you talked about specificity, regardless what you do, there's always the question of recruitment of muscle fibers. You have the intermuscular coordination. There's the discharge rate of motor units. Is there a stretch shortening activity or not? You've got to look at the joint angles, the force vectors, the magnitude of force, as we just mentioned, the intermuscular coordination, the contraction angle velocity, of course, the velocity on the movement, and not least the force production time. If you try to tick off those boxes, when it comes to plyometrics, you can tick off a few, but you can't tick off everything, So And some of those, maybe you can get an overload, so you can get an adaptation that it can be beneficial to sprinting, but not always.
So do you think we get too caught up in the, like you mentioned, the peak force, and people immediately go peak force sprinting, therefore we're going to go above that with X, Y, and Z exercises, whereas we should be maybe considering the list of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 other things that fall under that specificity.
I think so. It's you can, it's we know that the impulse is the most important thing. There's a production of force over time. And it's very easy to get. The magnitude is not a problem. But it's the produced force in such a short period of time. And also, the direction we're applying the forces, that is different too, I think it's J.B. Moran that stated it beautiful, sprinting is all about production of great force in the most effective direction in extreme short period of time. So if you think about that, not much outside the track is actually sprinting specific, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to team sport athletes on the specificity side, is that even more the case? That it does become more general rather than specific?
I mean, if you talk about transfer, there is probably a little bit more transfer, from like bounding or that kind of exercises to acceleration capacity, because the force of production times in the first couple of steps is a little longer. So and a lot of like team sport athletes, maybe they don't have so much time, So, but if they're good, if they have good jumping ability, if they're good, they have good coordination skills. They're not, they don't break it down easy. I think plyometrics can be a great way to improve acceleration for them. And, we know in many team sports, acceleration is really important for performance, and not only acceleration, but also deceleration and change of direction. So I think for team sports, especially this team sports that run, I think plyometrics can be a good tool for them.
You mentioned a couple of tests. Was it the continuous 5 jump test? You mentioned another one as well. Is there any other test that you use, or any test at all that you use with your sprinters that gives you a gauge of where you need to kind of plug gaps or take the program?
Well, I was a good friend of late Carmelo Bosco. He introduced me to his test batteries in the early 90s. Heard about the squat jump and the counter movement jump and the rebound jump and so on. And I think they still stand the test, even though they are still vertical. So in athletics, we have from the beginning of days used some horizontal jumping as well as the standing 3, standing 5, and even standing 10. So if you want to test, that's pretty easy conducted test. But like I said before, there seems to be a diminishing return too. If you have a sprinter that can jump 60 centimeter in the counter movement jump, and you focus on his vertical jumping ability, so he jumps 70 or 65 even, you rarely see a transfer to sprinting. But if you have a beginner that only jump maybe 45 to 50, if you can get him up to 60 or 65, you usually see a correlation with his sprinting ability. But it all depends on the type of athlete, of course. Some are born jumpers, some are not. Some gain great transfer, some other doesn't seem to respond well to jumping. So I think it's very much depend on the type of athlete they are from the beginning. If they're elastic type, they're very light frame type, they usually respond well, versus the more strong, maxillary strong, or very stiff type of athlete don't benefit much from rebound on jumping. They maybe need other means.
one thing that seems to get a lot of attention when it comes up, again referencing social media here, is Polish boxes. So boxes with various different angles that people use various different exercises. What's your thoughts on these type of boxes, and where would you use them? Where would you not use them? Who would you use them with?
When we talked about before, when we introduce low amplitude plyometrics in the fall, we usually use nature's Polish boxes.
Yeah.
But I have done, I have used them with skaters and ice hockey players. So even though the direction of movement is forward in skating, is a lot of has to do with application of force sideways. So jumping from side to side on a Polish box is probably better for your ankle joints rather than jumping from side to side, with long jumps landing on a flat surface. So you probably can produce more force. It's more healthy for your joints too, I think, to use those boxes. So we've been using them with like I said, skaters and hockey players.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone you wouldn't use those with?
I to be honest, I haven't used them that much,
Okay.
So.
And when you take your athletes into, like you say, into nature,
yeah,
I saw Joel Smith had put something on Instagram the other day about doing exactly that and using rocks and using trees and that kind of thing. That may make some coaches nervous because of the variability within the ground and all that kind of stuff. We both understand what I'm trying to say. Does that come into your thinking?
Well, it's usually the team sports coaches are nervous about everything playing, and the ironic thing is that they take 1,000 times greater risk every time they take a play out on the court. So I can't remember we had any issues with injuries when it comes to that kind of training in the fall. We usually do 3 or 4 weeks when we are outside. We live in a cold climate, so we all usually just in October that we do it, before we start moving and start to, more specific type of sprint training, but I think most athletes really benefited and they really enjoy it being outside too, so in the fresh fall, it's a nice time to be out, and that but it's usually, the temperature goes down to maybe, to between 5 and 10 degrees, but it's not great for high intensity, but for low intensity with short rest and so on, it works great if you dress properly.
We've chatted about plyometrics with sprinters quite a bit, touched on a little bit on team sports, but focusing purely on team sport athletes. If you're working with, do you work with soccer athletes at all?
Yeah. And nowadays I don't coach. I'm never on the court, but I've done that previously. But I'm more like an advisor these days when this matters.
Is there anything that you think from a team sport, and just using soccer as an example, but it could be anywhere, any specific things that coaches need to be really conscious of when programming plyometrics with athletes that have got, Saturday, Tuesday fixtures or heavily congested periods of fixtures? Is there anything that comes to mind that they really need to be conscious of when it comes to plyometrics and jump training?
Like in all training, you have to look at the athlete. You have to look at their history. You have to look at the history of training. You have to look at the history of injuries. So, like I said, it can be a very potent way of training. Can improve performance, but then you probably need high intensity. But like I said before, I think it can serve like an injury prevention tool. If you do it with low amplitude and less stress, it fits very, very well into a warm up. You get neuromuscular potentiation. You warm up. So I think it fits very, very well into any warm up routine. To prepare athletes for what they're doing. Playing their sport.
And one last thing on this topic, the topic of plyometrics and jump training, with jumping athletes, those that are jumping regularly in their sport, basketball comes to mind as a pretty easy example. How would you? Does all the principles that you've mentioned ring true for these type of athletes as well?
But it's funny. My son-in-law is a professional basketball player. So,
All right.
yeah, so we talk about this a lot. Of course,
In
jumping.
Sweden, Håkan.
In Sweden. Yeah, he's been all over Europe playing in professional leagues. So he plays for the national team. He's a great player. His father came from the States in the 70s, and all his family's been playing basketball. So I try to help him a little bit, But the thing is, that basketball is like track and field. You have the giant discus throwers, and you have the light frame sprinters in the same team. So you can't really handle them in the same way. If you have you have Shaq O'Neal in your team, he doesn't need to jump to dunk. He can just stand on his toes. But I think for most of them, it's not the jumping that is a problem. It's the landing. It's the landing that is the danger for them. And landing while change of direction. So. But that's what they do when they practice all the time, So there's a lot of jumping involved, So I don't know sometimes if you benefit so much from doing excessive jumping with a basketball player, Maybe in periods when you don't play as much, or you're from some other reason you're not jumping a lot. You can compare to a soccer game. You have a forward, and I think I saw some statistics, and maybe they jump 5 to 10 times a game. That is not enough to develop jumping ability. So if you want to be able to jump higher as a football player, you probably have to break that out and jump more if you want to be able to jump higher. So it all depends on the sport, but very much on the athlete and the type of athlete you are and what the history you have and so on.
And I guess this is where low amplitude plyometrics comes back in. Not something that's going to affect the game tomorrow, but from an injury prevention perspective, that could play its part.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So one thing that we chatted about before we hit record in the last couple of weeks, before I cancelled on you last week, and apologies for that, the functional exercises was something that we had a little discussion around, and your bugbear for what is classed as functional and what is not functional. Would you mind just giving us a bit of an insight into why that frustrates you so much?
When if you talk about specificity or functional, I think for sprinters the only truly specific thing you can do is to sprint faster. That's number one, But it's also the thing about functionality. I think there was a trend that came, but I don't think it's not so hot anymore, And if you ask people, if you are what is specificity or functionality, I think you get a lot of different answers, But if you ask anyone, do you train anything that is non-functional? What is non-functional? That's probably something that is a complete waste of time, So I think it's not a very good word, functional. I'm first to raise my hand. We are doing 50% functional, 50% non-functional training. So I don't know. It's but I think the trend has gone. Yeah, I think for a while it was almost becoming a circus. People were developing more and more advanced exercises, especially on unstable surfaces, doing all sort of Olympic lifts on Bose balls and so on. And the only ones that are really happy are like people like my son, that is an orthopedic surgeon. He get busy.
Keep them coming. Keep the functional trend coming.
So
yeah, interesting. You mentioned Olympic lifts there, Håkan.
Yeah.
What part do Olympic lifts play in your exercise selection when it comes to sprinters?
Well, I think and everything we do in the weight room, for me, it's is 90% general. And what is good about the gym, the Olympic lifting, that it incorporates a lot of muscle groups in one go, so it saves you a lot of time. I think we did some estimations, that if you want to exclude an Olympic full snatch with weight machine, it takes maybe 18 to 20 machines to involve all the muscle groups and involve in one snatch. So you save a lot of time. But the flip side of the coin, that is pretty technically demanding. So it's just like jumping. If you're 30 years old, you never done any Olympic lifting before, it's going to take you a while to benefit from Olympic lifting. So it has to, just like jump coordination, like sprint coordination. I think lifting technique, is great if you can incorporate it in your teens. It's much easier than if you want to have some kind of effect on it on a later stage.
Mm-hmm. So do you think that athletes get a lot of benefit from that learning effect early on? So from going from nothing to be able to be competent, that period of learning, is it worth putting in that effort and time, is what I'm saying, and still been able to get a training effect?
As a beginner, you gain from almost anything you do. You can gain a lot of strength even before puberty. You can get stronger. Of course, it's both the neural and the muscular side of it. But I don't think you should be afraid of resistant training when you're young. Just avoid the more stupid exercises and beware of the technique.
I suppose that's one thing that may put team sport coaches off, is the time taken to learn it. But not only that, but the time taken to learn it in big groups. When you're working with sprinters, you get either one or small group training. But when you've got larger groups, that becomes a bit more difficult. Would that, if you were advising on a kind of team sport with 10, 15, 20 players, would that be something that you would advise on, or look for alternatives when it comes to Olympic lifts?
I was consulting a little bit in Bolton Wanderers it's a long time ago, when my friend Paul Bolson was working there. That is it's like the French Legion, a professional football team. They had people, from all over the world, and I remember, the goalie, I think his name was Jeskelainen,
Jeskelainen,
yeah. He came from the Finnish school, He had perfect lifting technique. He could bounce over very high hurdles. He was a true athlete. For him, no problem at all. Then they had recruited, Yuri Yorkaev, French, world championship. He probably never been in a gym. So why, and they're both 30 plus, So why stop Jeskelainen from doing what he's used to, what he's doing very well, and why introduce something for Yorkaev that he's never going to benefit and probably is not going to like? You have to find other means of getting him strong. You have to get other means of getting him, injury free and so on. You have to treat individual players like as team players, as individual players. I think especially the sport of football has a long way to go when it comes to physical training. There are some teams that are working really, really well, treating their players individually, but too many times I see group setting, even on elite level, and it's not good enough for the richest sport in the world.
What an amazing team that was at Bolton. Bringing Yorkaev and Fernando Hierro and all these kind of World Cup winners, and what a crazy time.
Ivar Campo.
Ivar Campo, yeah.
Tufting from Denmark. They had J.J. Okocha, super dribbler from Nigeria. There was some great experience.
What was Tufting's first name? Is it Stig?
Stig Tufting.
Stig, yes.
Yeah. He was a tough guy.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, one thing I wanted to ask you about finally, Håkan, was the research project that you've got going on in hockey. I think that's something you've put out online as well. So hopefully we can have a little chat around that. Just give us a bit of a background on the research topic that you're involved with.
It's actually the sport of ice bandy. It's it's similar, it's an ice sport, but it would be like talking to an Irish about hurling. It's a pretty local sport, but it's still fairly popular in Scandinavia and in Russia, in the former Soviet countries. It played on a field big as a football field, and it's played with a ball instead of a puck. And they played 2 times 45 minutes with very few exchanges. And it's a super fast sport. Skating is crucial. So we started, the High Performance Center. We are doing a research project together with the Ice Bandy Federation and 2 universities. The North University in Norway and Linnéa University in Växjö, Kalmar. So what we are doing is to try to find characteristic differences between fast and slow skaters. So it's a biomechanical study, and so far I think we have tested almost 100 elite and junior elite male and female skaters. So it's a big, it's a powerful data in that sense, And my responsibility is not to be assigned, but being conducting data, and it's been I've spent a lot of hours in ice. They play inside, but it's still cold, So 6 or 8 hours a day in front of a computer in an ice rink, it's a it's a challenge.
Yeah, just come back to the linking the two and the kind of athletes that are skating on ice and working on ice and plyometrics. And I'm thinking about the specificity side of things, and then when you when you mentioned that earlier on, is there any link? Would you advise on plyometrics for skaters?
The biggest difference with skating and running is that in skating there is no flight phase, right? They have contact with the ice. And the biggest difference I find, if you talk about force production time in sprinting, we talk about the contact time, which is maybe 80 to 100 milliseconds for a sprinter. But in ice skating, fast skating, the contact time is maybe over 300, almost 400 milliseconds. So you have a much longer time to produce force. So in that sense, maybe maximum strength has a little better transfer than really fast plyometrics. But we know that there are plyometrics, that in nature are a little slower too. Some are categorized like a slower shortening cycle over 250 milliseconds. Those kind of jumps maybe benefit more. But you also have to take into consideration skaters. They have a skating boot, so they are not able to use the plantar flexors as much as sprinters. So you have to be careful in terms of jumping, especially on the forefoot, and because they're like their Achilles tendons and so on are also not used to those kind of impact forces. So you have to use different kind of jumps, I think, with skaters than you do with track and field or running athletes. So, yeah.
Interesting. Well, Håkan, thank you very much for your time. Really do appreciate it. But would you mind, I don't know if it's the top of your mind or it's yet to be done, but would you mind just giving us a small insight into what you're going to talk about in Leeds?
Well, since I'm usually these days I'm the dinosaur in the room, I've been a coach for 40 years, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my experiences, and especially experience around heavy resistance strength training, plyometrics and resisted sprinting for development of sprinting. So that's what the focus of my speech in Leeds.
Excited to have you. Thank you for a little teaser there. But Håkan, thank you very much for coming on the podcast again. Really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to meeting you in person in March. And have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Rob. And see you soon.
Thanks, Håkan.
Yeah.